welcome to the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast channel. All of the things, Emile, great to have you here. So let's dive in, share a little bit about how you got to Brazil and your life as a global citizen and what that looks like there.
Oh, sure. I live in Brazil now in Florianopolis on a beautiful island, which I think usually makes the top charts for best cities in the world to be a digital nomad. It's an island city. I've been here for more than 2 years this time, but I first became interested in Brazil in my early 20s. And by mid-20s, I moved to São Paulo I got a scholarship to study at a university in São Paulo for a year. And then I did some research with a professor that got me another scholarship to go back and study in Rio for a summer. And every excuse I could get to write research reports on politics and so on for my graduate studies, I always chose something around Brazil as a topic in order to get me to study something that was sort of had become dear to my heart. I'm kind of a Brazilian at heart, you could say, in some ways definitely not. I'm proud to be American and all that. But anyway, I spent a number of years. I spent 10 years working for exporters, traveling all over the world to many, many countries, visiting customers, managing distributors primarily. Some of that was based in the U.S. I was living in the U.S., but traveling from there all the time. And then I moved to New Zealand with my family and was doing the same thing from New Zealand. But after New Zealand, after COVID, sort of authoritarianism, you could say, became so crazy, I sort of fled like a refugee to Brazil, because fortunately my Brazilian wife and Brazilian children, their dual nationality, they were able to get me, I could move there with them and instantly apply for permanent residency. I was able to go from a country that had been free till COVID and then was not free at all to a country that couldn't possibly enforce lockdowns if they wanted to, because Brazilians like to disobey rules. They don't trust authority. They like to dance on the beach. And I was able to move to a place of relative freedom and live a relatively sane life again. Since end of 2021, I've been living here and am still doing that now.
Okay, so you've been there for quite a while, full time. Love that you realized that there was potential to live a better lifestyle elsewhere, which is what we're all about on this channel and the podcast. But so you've been there for a while. You have obtained your PR, potentially citizenship. So can you share a little bit about what that journey could look like for somebody looking to, get residency or potentially to naturalize down the line? It takes a little bit of time to get their citizenship. Brazil, I think, is one of the hottest countries in hot in terms of popular, not in terms of heat. One of the most popular countries for foreigners to want to go for various different reasons. So share with us on a high level some of the options that people would have if they are looking to relocate to Brazil.
Sure. Well, I did get the citizenship. One of the routes that you can go is that if you have a Brazilian spouse or a civil union, if you're from the gay community, either way, my understanding is you can go if you're a foreigner or a non-Brazilian, as they just call gringo. It's not derogatory in Portuguese. You can live with your spouse or civil union partner, and then right after a year of that permanent resident status, you can go straight for citizenship. So citizenship. So there's two ways through family. The one is sort of a significant other, your significant other, a relationship with someone, and the other is through having a Brazilian child, whether of your spawn or adopted. Either way. And it's actually, you can apply for permanent residence right away when you meet these criteria. You move to Brazil, you got a Brazilian spouse and or a Brazilian child. And either way, you can immediately apply for permanent residence and then be on that permanent residence for 1 year before you qualify to be able to apply for citizenship. But if there's a little less paperwork, if you're applying through your child. So even though I was married and had two Brazilian children, so I brought all the documentation to the Polícia Federal when I went to do my citizenship interview. And so the police officer could have approved me either through my spouse or my wife or through my children, but just because he knows he needs less paperwork through the child, he didn't. He just did it through my daughter. It was just a random. Let me see your daughter's proof of Brazilian nationality, and so he's like, less paperwork. Just went with her. So that's the familial way, right? Another is citizenship by investment. So for people looking to plant a flag in Brazil, in Latin America, the South American powerhouse, the one Portuguese-speaking country in the region. Brazil's a great place to do it. And if you're willing to put down 1 million reais, which is at the moment on a 5-to-1 ratio about between the U.S. dollar and the real, or the Brazilian real, it's so 1 million reais, so $200,000. So if you've got the assets and you're willing to put down around $200,000 as of March 2024 exchange rate, you can apply for permanent residence. Now, in the case of permanent residence by investment, they put you on like 1 year temporary residency before you can go and apply for the permanent residence. But as long as you're living here for that 1 year, you qualify to have it switched over to a permanent residence. Now, Brazil no longer has citizenship by investment, CBI. Many years ago, when I lived here back in 2007, I did a little research, and I found that at that time, if you had invested $50,000 US, you could go straight to citizenship. Not a bad deal at all.
Not a bad deal at all.
Yeah, not bad at all these days. Of course, inflation, $50,000 was worth more then than it is now, but still, even let's say that might have been, I don't know, 70-ish, 80-ish thousand US dollars in today's money, but which is kind of a bargain, especially if you look at the Caribbean countries, which charge between $100,000 and $200,000 each. I saw that they just raised them, some of them to $200,000. Probably just for the individual, not even necessarily including the family. Yeah. The bar is pretty high, especially with the new normal COVID world. With a lot of people, they realize that they can do their job from anywhere in the world, or at least if they're moving north and south, so they can stay in roughly the same time zone as their employer. So if you're North American moving to South America, time zone wise is no big deal. You're awake at the same time as your boss. Brazil's a good destination. And anyway, I'm sort of forgetting where I was. So back to you.
No, those are some interesting options. 200,000 USD approximately for you're investing in the country. So you are going to get some sort of returns.
For sure.
I don't think that is horrible, especially, and of course that's PR, so you would still have to spend some time on the ground, but the Caribbean, it's going to be starting at 200 just for the individual. So I think if you are, and I've seen this trajectory just over the last 6 months even, but of course longer term, if you are looking to get an additional residency, citizenship, and especially if you're looking to invest and get some sort of returns in the long term, now is the time to do it, because it is just going to keep going up and up, 500,000 increasing from there. So 200K is not a bad deal.
That's right. And that's, you touched on the point I was getting to and sort of forgot there was that sort of in the post-COVID world, and now everybody knows they can work, they realize they can work from anywhere, and their employers are more used to that. They realized people can be productive even if they're not sitting in this chair in this cubicle for 40 hours. There's suddenly a more demand for high value visas to live and work in other countries. So what some countries are saying, we want you, and they're lowering the barrier, but simultaneously, plenty of other countries keep raising them. So also the 1 million reais, 200-ish thousand US dollar threshold for permanent residence by investment, you can actually get at a 30% discount if you're doing through real estate. And real estate's the main way that people do it. I don't know all the options, but I know most people just go to the real estate. If you're willing to purchase real estate in several of the lesser, let's say, commonly moved to locations in Brazil, the Brazilian government says, 700,000 is fine, or 700,000. Yeah. Yes. 700,000 is fine. So you get, instead of doing a million reais, you can do 700,000 by just, so you could do it that way, stay long. I don't know what the rules are regarding how long do you have to hold it before you can sell it and that kind of thing. But, once they already give you a permanent residence visa, my guess is if you sell it, then buy a home in a more common place, more usually desired by, expats, Florianopolis, I don't know, Rio, something like that, yeah. So.
Yeah, a little bit higher price point there. Any other interesting options that you see commonly used for residency leading into citizenship, or are those kind of the main ones?
Those are the main ones that come up again and again, by investment or through family, whether spouse or children.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I wanted to ask you, you mentioned to me about your take on flag theory in Brazil and taxation. So share a little bit about what that looks like and what that looks like for you.
Are you interested in becoming a global citizen and living a lifestyle by design in a country that aligns with you? If this is a lifestyle that you're seeking to create, we can help. Whether it be multiple residencies, citizenships, bank accounts, trust or company formations, we operate in 30 plus of the most tax-friendly jurisdictions around the globe to get you structured properly. Head to the link in the show notes to learn more and to get your global citizen journey underway today.
Sure. So there's a man named Harry Schultz who was an investor. He moved and acquired citizenships and accumulated assets around the world in relatively tax-friendlier nations. And he had a what he called flag theory. And the basic idea behind it is that you want to hold citizenships and their passports from countries that don't tax your global income. That means outside their borders. So that's the first. Second, actually on that point, sort of the Americans and Eritrea historically, and now Australia since COVID, because Australia is trying to figure out, well, how are we going to pay for all this money that we paid to keep people at home for years? So tax rates go up and, basically the Australians, the Americans, they've got to pay no matter where they are. At least they have to file, which is burdensome in itself. So on that front, these are, if you're going to be a digital nomad or an expat, that's kind of less desirable. And I say this as someone who has an American passport. It is somewhat of a drag on me every single year, especially tax time. But yeah, ideally you want to hold, as I understand, Canada is one, first world passport that's well accepted around the world, but they don't yet at least tax your global income just as long as you're not living there. Correct so far?
You are correct. Yeah. That might change in maybe a decade or two, but it takes so long to change tax laws. Who knows?
Okay. Well, Australia just did it. And usually what Australia does, New Zealand follows. And, I was super close to New Zealand, to applying for New Zealand citizenship before I just couldn't, take it there anymore at that time in history. So I still have the permanent residence, so I can still move back there and stay forever. You don't have to go and visit every few years to maintain it like a lot of countries have, like the U.S. does for its green card and so on. So I kind of have the best of both worlds. I don't have its passport, unfortunately, but I can, flag theory. So the first is you want to hold passports and citizenships from countries that don't tax your global income outside their borders. Number two is you want to maintain status as a tax residence in countries that don't tax your income outside of their borders. For example, my New Zealand permanent residence is an example of that. I can always move back there. but they don't tax my global income. I will say, not the best. Since I stayed there for more than 4 years, actually they would now. I don't know. Maybe a better example would be something like Paraguay, which to my knowledge, doesn't matter how many years you live there, they're just not going to tax your income outside of their borders. So that's ideal. You want to be physically living in a country that won't tax you, preferably one that isn't one that you hold a citizenship. And usually the basic idea in most countries, as far as I've seen, is that if you stay in a country for 183 days ish, which is around 6 months, that's usually how long it takes to acquire tax residency status in that country. So find one that won't tax your global income. If, let's say, you're a Bitcoin and you're selling Bitcoin along the way, you want to also look for a country that doesn't have apply capital gains tax to you while you're there. So that's the second criteria. The third criteria of Harry Schultz flag theory is that if you're going to incorporate companies, you want to make sure that your companies are incorporated in countries with either zero corporate tax or very low corporate tax. I think a lot of people will incorporate in Puerto Rico for that reason, just for example, or they'll do Ireland and that kind of thing. Oh, so how Brazil fits into that. So here's the thing, is that Brazil actually does tax your global income. So why in the world would I promote Brazil? Well, first of all, it's the funnest country. Categorically. But here's the thing, is that if you want to do the expat legal tax minimization life, for a lot of reasons, the Brazilian passport is a desirable one. So what I recommend for people that are tax conscious and want to legally reduce their tax, I say, well, okay, so integrate Brazil into your long-term tax strategy, because Brazil, it's not like the US or Australia now or Eritrea, where once you get the passport, if you move, they continue to consider you a tax resident and tax you or require you to at least file every year. They don't do that. So you could come for a number of reasons. The Brazilian passport's desirable. We can get into those. You stay, you subject yourself to their global tax scheme for, let's say, a couple years. If you have a spouse, you could do it in a couple years. Like I did, I got it in less than 2 years. And then you can move to neighboring Paraguay at zero tax over there. And now you have the Brazilian passport that legally allows you to live in Paraguay, where they don't tax your global income. And you can move on. You don't have to, and you could still come back to Brazil every single year. So it's like a lifestyle improvement. You can still, that home that you bought for the permanent residence, you can come back to it. Just don't stay 183 days every year. And enjoy Brazil for slightly less than 6 months every year, but then go back to wherever they tax you at zero, and keep bouncing back and forth and enjoy the lifestyle change, the improvement.
Yeah, I love that. I am such a big proponent of the flag theory. I think, there could easily be like 9 and 10 flags nowadays, but you kind of have the core 5. And it's interesting because I think it's part of a long-term holistic plan, is the way that I see it, where right now we have some clients who are interested in Peru and Argentina because those are, 3.5 years on average to naturalize. So it's a shorter time frame than most, but it really is part of the long-term picture of where do you want to live for quite a few years and become a tax resident there. You can always leave that at the end of that time period. But what countries are attractive to you? The food, the culture, the climate. There's so much that goes into it. And if you're going to be spending anywhere from usually 3 to sometimes 7 or 8 years, you want to make sure that it's going to be a lifestyle that you like. And then after that, you can move on and work toward your next residency, citizenship, whatever that may be. So I'm curious now, in talking about flag theory, I'm curious about the banking aspect in Brazil. I know most countries will not let you now increasingly open a bank account unless you are a resident there. So I assume it's the same with Brazil. And then once you are, let's just say, a standard temporary resident, is that pretty straightforward to open some sort of bank account and do your day-to-day banking in Brazil?
Yeah, okay. That's a good point. Is that banks here, they tend to be sort of a stickler for the tax rules, not just the tax rules, but if you don't have your RNM, or in Portuguese, RNM, your Registro Nacional Migratório, which is your it's not only you've got a tax ID, which is separate from that, but you've also got to have your foreigner registration number, something translates to something like that. So if you don't have these, and as I recall, I think you have to have already received the physical card. Don't quote me on that one. Most banks won't talk to you, but a friend of mine, I forget the name of it now. I know it's possible, and I could send it to you when I can find it, and then you can put it in the show notes or something. But he found one bank that will let you. So clearly, if there's one Brazilian bank that will still let you open up a bank account and transfer your money from abroad to it before, at least before you have your foreigner ID, possibly before you have your your Brazilian tax ID, your CPF as they call it. Yeah, so you've got a way to do it. But in his case, it was an online bank. They don't have a branch. He had already moved here. He applied for digital nomad visa right off the bat, but he just wanted to move money here quickly. So he did the work, found one bank that would let him do it, and so. But it's not a long-term strategy. I don't know if he loves the bank.
Yeah, that's the thing that I find usually, especially in Latin America, the like quote unquote fintechs. I think in Brazil there's New Bank is one of the fintechs.
Yes.
I think there's a few. They will pretty easily let you open accounts, but the problem and like what I usually tell clients is those are good starting points, but as you know,
Exactly.
you don't want that something long term because especially with fintech banks, you don't know when they're going to close the account. They could there's a lot of reports of
Yeah, good point.
Wise actually just within the last few months even closing accounts and giving absolutely no reason. You have 30 days to get the money out of the account. If that's a good case for you, like that's a good situation. So yeah, it can be tricky with banking.
I've had good experience moving money to Brazilian bank accounts using Wise, formerly TransferWise, no problem. I will say, let me just as an example of the kind of thing that can happen to you. When I first moved back here with my wife in 2021, we were in a rush to buy a car really quickly, right? And so we went, negotiated. I had a good deal on a car already negotiated, and now it's time to send him the money. And I have all of the money. I'm going to buy the whole car in a day, just as soon as I can transfer my money from New Zealand to Brazil. So we found everybody recommended Banco Inter, and it's got this orange logo if you find, and it's an online only bank, so there's no branch that you can pop into that I'm aware of. And I think yes, and I was working a little bit for a Brazilian company for a short time, and they said they want to do everybody's direct deposit to the same bank. You can't have another bank because they want to standardize things for their simplicity. Okay, so I created one hoping to pay for this car, but all the money was transferred, but it was some weird thing that they put a temporary block on it, and I could only pay this car sales company, small intervals at a time, and I had all the money to just buy the whole car, and my wife and I were on, especially her, because she's native Brazilian, so speaks Portuguese better than me. Even every time she called, she had some junior level person that had no permission to help her with anything, and they would always tell her, "I'm not allowed to do that." And she said, "Great, if you're not allowed to, may I please speak with your manager?" And so she spent 2 weeks calling the same bank every single day as the car company was waiting for the payment, and we could have lost the car. And then finally, after 2 weeks, one of the junior level people on the phone broke a rule and transferred her to the manager, and suddenly the problem was fixed. And so banking in Brazil can be a nightmare. If you need to use one of these nightmarish banks as a temporary thing because you need banking quickly, okay. Just enough to buy a car, okay. But yes, over the long term, find good banking.
Yeah, definitely. And I have seen that happen in other countries as well. I feel like if you're moving to a country, you really want to, in most countries, get tax residency, stay there long term, get into the banking system. You can always leave, but you want to make sure that you have some sort of establishments that you can open these bank accounts and even open, investment accounts abroad where they're going to want to see that utility bill with your name and your address. There's a lot of moving pieces that a lot of people don't think of,
Yeah.
especially when they are living a more travel nomadic life and
Mm-hmm.
don't necessarily have a home base, so to say. So I'm curious because I know there are always questions about this. Now, when you naturalize in the country, or if you have a child in the country, the child gains citizenship. There in Brazil is a required, I'm going to put in air quotes, military duty at a certain age. So can you talk a little bit about that, how you could potentially get out of that, what that looks like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I didn't grow up in Brazil as a native Brazilian, so but let me try to summarize what I remember from talking to my guy friends, because I think the conscription it applies to our male privilege. We're the ones that have to do it. So you have to go and you have to go register. But some of them, I've heard Brazilian men will say, "Oh, but my leg hurts," or they'll find some way out of it or find some medical excuse. I think the obligatory part is that you have to go and you have to go register for the draft. But whether or not they choose you is another question. In the same case that I had to do it too. Once I naturalized, the very first thing that I had to do before I could go and apply for a passport, I had to do two things. One is go register to vote. And the second is I had to go register with the Army. And that's funny because I was already in the U.S. Air Force. So, I'm not going to do it again. But yeah, I had to register. But I asked my Brazilian friends, I said, there's no way I'm spending any amount of time in the Brazilian Army, but I'm required to do this thing before they'll issue me a passport. And my Brazilian friends who had been in the military, they said, don't worry, I know how it works. Because here's the thing, in Portuguese, they call it alistamento. And that essentially comes down to what Americans call the selective service. It's sort of, I'm registering myself as a male capable of going to the military because I'm required to. But that sounds scary because alistamento, it sounds like it's English language cousin, enlistment, which if you enlist in English, that means you're in the military. So I just wanted to confirm I'm not in the military, right? And everybody said, no. So, okay, now I'll do it. Yeah.
Very different. Yeah. And it's interesting because I know a lot of these countries I'm referring to Latin America, some sort of service like that, but they become somewhat optional / only if you're chosen. I know I'm in Mexico right now. So I know here in Mexico, they technically have something similar, but it's more of a community service, and it's really only if you are chosen. And then there's certain ways to get out of that as well. So I think most countries you have some sort of option, but that's good to know kind of how that works for Brazil. I see somebody asked about company formation. I think that's probably a little bit more specific than the high level here. So if you do want to reach out, then I think for company formation, that would probably be the better way to go, unless you have something that you want to touch on that's important on a high level for company formation, Emile.
Okay. Yeah. I will say that like if you want to start Brazil has different structures, just like probably every country. Actually, I think in Brazil, everybody told me there's only limited. I'm sorry. I meant to say New Zealand. When I was in New Zealand, it was like every country was a limited, and that's it. I think I was told that there's only one corporate structure in New Zealand. Here, there's a number of them. You can found the very basic one, like the most basic one possible. If let's say you're a micro entrepreneur and you just want to get started, and you don't want to handle constant tax compliance, keeping every single receipt and so on, is they have something called it's a micro entrepreneur status, and the corporation is called a MEI, an MEI. And I think as long as you're not making something like $20,000, I think I converted it years ago. I think of it in dollars. I don't remember what it was in reais, but anyway, something like $20,000. If you don't make above that threshold, You don't have to pay taxes. So as a micro entrepreneur, you can just get started, and you still have to. I think you have to choose a tax agency on your behalf. So they just keep your structure alive. So you pay the tax agent. An agency to keep it alive to manage your accounting, and simultaneously you have to pay the government monthly to keep the structure open. But I think it works that way generally in terms of you pay the accountant monthly, and you pay to keep the structure open monthly, no matter which structure you're under. But if you're just dipping your toe into entrepreneurship in Brazil, you can begin with this no paperwork required, no taxes required structure called a MEI, and sort of work your way up. And once your income goes to above that, something like $20,000 a year threshold, then I think the one just above that is called a limited, and you can, and then you're required to, of course, always do proper accounting and pay the taxes and so on.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I know quite a few countries do have a similar structure to just get companies started, but also to get companies into their system as well. You're probably going to stay in that system. Okay, so we've talked about a few different topics. Is there anything before we wrap up that we haven't touched on that we should have?
Well, you could touch briefly, or we could touch briefly on just the fact why Brazil in the first place. So I said it's fun categorically because I think it's fun. But yeah, beyond, I mean, most people know, the carnival. They know the beach culture. They know football or soccer to the Americans. The amazing food, very diverse cuisine, sort of a beans and rice, and then lots of meat. They love their meat. They like to put sugar in everything because it's a sugar cane producer and exporter. I'm not a fan of that. I always have to tell, if I order fruit, please no sugar. But if you love meat, Brazil's really the place to be. I always joke with the Argentinians that Argentinians have the second best meat in all of South America, and they get angry with me.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say they will get angry.
Just rub it in. It's like they're cousins, the Brazilians and Argentinians, and battle it out and so on. Anyway, yeah. So, of course, there's the culture. Brazil. As far as finding a life partner, I actually think that Brazil is a great place because they have appreciation for the sort of the traditional nuclear family, but they're also tolerant if you happen to be gay, right? So whichever one you have, you can find. It's a great place to find a life partner. I think.
I like that. I've never heard that taken before.
Yeah. So they've got it both. They've got it all. Traditional family values and tolerant on both sides. So I like that about Brazil as well. And what else? Also the value of a Brazilian passport. For me, this is one of the key things. So you don't want to be a non-aligned. Ideally, in terms of passport, in terms of passport value, you want a passport that will allow you to visit more countries visa-free, right? And since the U.S. is still in its empire, declining, but still is, if you happen to pick up a passport that is non-aligned with the U.S., such as North Korea or Iran, you're going to have time entering a lot of countries and trying to get good visas from countries that you want to live in, right? Brazil is in a block called the BRICS, right? Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. From my personal point of view, the Brazil, if you're going to have a BRICS passport, because I like BRICS, it's kind of a sweet spot between you don't want it non-aligned. If you're going to pick up a passport, you don't want a North Korean passport because then the other countries are going to look at you with suspicion, right? But you also don't want to be so, like, for example, if you're an American and you don't want to be spied on by your government, the big mass surveillance and the 5 eyes and the 14 eyes, moving to Canada and picking up a Canadian citizenship doesn't really help you because Canada is a member of that too. and, so is New Zealand and so on, right? So it doesn't really give you a sort of a geopolitical hedge against possible geopolitical turmoil, right? Right. But a BRICS passport does, right? Because it's not so non-aligned as, let's say, North Korea or Iran or something, or now Russia. Now Russia's really kind of way over there in terms of the way it's looked at with suspicion by the NATO countries, at least, right? So for that reason, I wouldn't want personally, if I'm not going to go out of my way personally to acquire a Russian passport. No offense against Russians or anything like that. It's, South Africa is going a particular direction politically that's more difficult. I think it could have, the passport might be less valuable in the near future. I would guess. China, as I recall, I think China doesn't even let you. You lived there, so
they won't even recognize. A lot of countries don't recognize dual citizenship. It's also very difficult to get that passport. In theory, sometimes you can make it work, but I'm always a proponent of, like, do you really want to keep a passport if it's something that you're not declaring to a country? Keep everything on the up and up is how I like to go about my global planning.
Yes, same here. And I know India as well. You can't do, if they find out you have another passport, maybe you're in trouble or something. India also doesn't want you. Indonesia, a number of countries don't want you to have a second one, right? So, I think on one hand, if you're going to go out of your way to get a passport, ideally you don't want to acquire a passport that's going to give you trouble with, your country of origin. But you want some geopolitical hedge. You want slightly not aligned politically, but also not in any way, shape, or form an enemy with your home country, right? And for me, Brazil is the sweet spot in the BRICS. So I'm very, it's valuable. It's a good geopolitical hedge.
Yeah, I know. I think Brazil is a great passport to have in the portfolio. As the sun's setting, the light, I'm outside, the light is looking a little bit crazy. But I think it's a great passport to have. And depending on your lifestyle too, it's like, it could be one of 2 passports, or it could be one of 5 passports. And it just depends, again, going back to that lifestyle and your business and what comes into play for you, because it looks different for every individual.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, this has been really interesting. Chatting a little bit about Brazil, lots of interest, very popular place to go. Thank you for being here.
You've just listened to the Work, Wealth, and Travel podcast. If anything from this episode resonated with you, I would appreciate if you share this podcast on your socials. And of course, be sure to tag me. And don't forget to leave a review on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you for joining me on this global citizen journey, and I'll see you in the next episode.